The tabletop role-playing market has absolutely exploded in recent years, thanks in no small part to really popular online shows such as Critical Role, which play Dungeons & Dragons. This popularity was then amplified by the COVID outbreak, and because of this, the words tabletop role-playing and Dungeons & Dragons basically became synonymous. And it's because of this huge boost in popularity that we've seen a massive uptick in TTRPG-focused Kickstarters for third-party content for whatever game system it may be, or Patreons focused on creating maps, adventures, items, gem guides, and so much more. Plus, there have been tons of new releases for adventures, rule documents, game systems, and even virtual tabletops, all of which were released and created essentially out of this passion for this hobby that we all share, that being TTRPGs. And some of these virtual tabletops include Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, and Foundry VTT. The tabletop role-playing community has been thriving recently in terms of the amount of content, whether it be third-party or official, that's been released in the recent years, regardless of what game system you may be using. And all of this has been led by D&D and Wizards of the Coast at the very top. Or at least until recently. Because that all changed when a year ago, Wizards of the Coast's empire and hold that they had on the entire tabletop role-playing community began to crumble because of the OGL crisis. Many creators jumped ship fearing that their livelihood would be claimed by an evil corporation, while others worried that this was the end of the D&D brand in its entirety, and many began to look to Pathfinder as their new home since the D&D game system was burning before their very eyes. However, despite this, many people began to dabble in other game systems besides D&D and Pathfinder, and began to realize that D&D wasn't the end-all be-all for game systems, and wasn't even the best game system out there in terms of the best game system for their gaming group, perhaps. And so many people began to realize that there was a much bigger world out there beyond the walls of Dungeons & Dragons. And it's because of this that many people, companies, and brands who already had a massive following of TTRPG nerds who liked their content decided, why jump ship to another game system and have to change all my content over to adapt to that game system when I can just create my own? And all of this brings us to the year 2024, where D&D is no longer on top, books are becoming collector's items, I guess, virtual tabletops are becoming ever so more increasingly popular, and there are dozens of new budding game systems out there that show tons of promise that are being created and even released this year, and of course, there is tons of uncertainty. And that's the topic of today's video, because we're going to be talking about the future landscape of the TTRPG space. So, hello, my name is Nate Mon, and I'm a huge TTRPG nerd who, like you, loves to roll dice and play legendary characters in a world of my game master's creation. And like I said before, in this video we're going to be talking about the future TTRPG space for 2024, and what you can expect from this year and perhaps the years that are coming for the TTRPG space. And to start off, I want to make a point, but in order to do so, we need to talk about some of the biggest game systems that are going to be either released or we're going to be hearing a lot about in 2024. So let's first start off by talking about Critical Role's Daggerheart. As of now, we know that it's a 2d12 system, which is a departure from the d20 system that D&D uses. It has a really sleek looking character sheet that uses cards for things like classes, features, and stuff like that, and evidently it needs some work still, or at least that's what I've heard from people who play tested it at Gen Con. While the game may need some more time in the oven before it's officially released, it is inevitable that this game system is going to be very popular upon release because it's made by Darrington Press, and it's most likely going to be Critical Role's new official game system. So one would assume that the massive audience that Critical Role has would at least try out the system, if not entirely switch to it, and I don't know about you guys, but I for one would love to give it a try, once it's officially released of course. And who knows, maybe in the coming years we'll see Daggerheart become the new most popular game system, and there will be tons of new third-party content being released for it and so forth, but of course, that remains to be seen. On top of this, Darrington Press have already kind of proven themselves to be a very capable company when it comes to creating game systems, because they just recently released Candela Obscura, and I don't know if you guys have messed around with this game system, but it is really fun, and it uses that D6 system as opposed to a D20 system. And that's kind of what I want to harp on here, because I would probably have never tried out a D6 system like Candela Obscura if it wasn't released by Darrington Press, which was created by Critical Role. And that's kind of what I want to harp on here, because if it wasn't released by Darrington Press, I probably would have never played Candela Obscura, or just saw it was a D6 system and been like, I don't want to learn a new system because I'm more comfortable with D20s. If I'm a unique case, then that's all fine and dandy, but I'm willing to bet that there are lots of people out there who have tried out Candela Obscura who would have never done or tried a D6 system if it weren't made by Critical Role. And because of that, they may play this game system and realize, I really like D6 systems, I'm gonna go and play more D6 systems and then purchase and support those game systems. Which goes to show how much power Darrington Press has, and if that's the case with Daggerheart as well, this may mean that the 2D12 system becomes very popular and leads other people to try out new game systems that are 2D12 or D12 systems in general, which could then lead to the 2D12 system becoming the new most popular game system as opposed to a D20 system. But now let's move on to the next big dog that I would keep a lookout for in 2024, which is Kobold Press's Tales of the Valiant. This was the game system that was born out of the Project Black Flag resistance against WotC/Hasbro, and once it was announced, it immediately gained tons of support and excitement because it claimed that it was going to be a game system that would be very D&D 5e compatible, while correcting and fixing some of the known D&D issues that were very apparent to any D&D veteran. On top of this, since the game system was created by Kobold Press, which is a very popular brand that makes third-party D&D content, it's bound to have a good player base on release. And if their Kickstarter is any indication, I think that there are quite a few people out there who would want to try out this game system. And as far as I know, you can kind of think of Tales of the Valiant as a healthy blend between D&D and Pathfinder, which is pretty exciting for me at least because I play both D&D and Pathfinder pretty frequently. So because of that, I'm really excited to see how this game system holds up once it's officially released. In my opinion, I'm really curious to see how Tales of the Valiant holds up to D&D and Pathfinder once it's officially released, because it has so much potential with everything that they've released so far and everything that they've said they're going to be doing with the game system. And I know that they've released some playtest content. I can go and look at some of the new rules right now that are going to be officially released, but I like to wait until a game system has been officially released before I make my first impressions on it, because I don't like looking at a project before it's not complete, if that makes sense. And I know that there are some other very big and popular TTRPG projects that are currently in the works, but I'm not going to be going in depth into talking about each and every one of them because that would make this video way too long. I mainly wanted to show that there are a lot of new TTRPGs that are being made, which I'll expand on here in a second, so stay tuned. Since the base rules of D&D are now underneath Creative Commons, people have begun releasing documents with their own rules and tweaks to D&D, which then inspires people to make their own game systems. However, while all of these game systems being released is fantastic, and while D&D, at least the base rules, going underneath Creative Commons is also fantastic for the entire community as a whole, it's a pretty big sign that there is a big change coming to the community that WotC is trying to make. The prices for books are getting more expensive, which could lead to other companies and game systems following suit. WotC ended their contract with Penguin Random House, and they're dumping tons of money into their new online service and their VTT that's still in development, not to mention Maps, which is their top-down VTT, which they're slowly updating as well. All of this essentially tells us they're trying to shift away from physical goods and become a brand that is entirely online. Which makes sense because they just recently announced that their D&D 5e is going to remain D&D 5e forever, and they're just going to be releasing patch notes for it essentially, like patch notes for a video game. And it makes sense, books are expensive to make, ship, and store, and with each new generation of consumers are people who would much prefer a PDF where they can word search things rather than a physical book where in the heat of the moment it can be very difficult to find a rule quickly. While I personally love collecting adventure books and third-party content, especially the limited edition versions of those books, WotC probably won't be making physical books, or at least not as many physical books like they used to, for much longer. And if you think it's only going to be WotC that's going to stop making physical books, or at least greatly reduce the amount of physical books that they make, then I think you may be wrong. Because while the D&D brand isn't exactly in the best spot that it's ever been, it is still a massive brand and a massive ship in the sea of TTRPGs, and each movement that D&D makes sends out waves to everyone else in the sea. And because of this, it may even force or cause a trend, I should say, of companies and creators stop making as many physical books as they used to and just focus on the PDF or VTT versions of their game systems/books. And before we know it, all of this may be happening sooner than we think. But now, how soon is soon? Well, who knows? But this leads me to my next point, which is that I think that in 2024 and future years, we will see a much greater shift to the online space for TTRPGs as opposed to the physical space, which we're kind of already seeing happen right now. Online virtual tabletops like Roll20, for example, popularized the idea of playing your favorite TTRPG online with your friends. And while I know VTTs like Fantasy Grounds were technically released earlier, Roll20 was the first to really capitalize on selling virtual TTRPG content online and being a one-stop shop for basically anything you need for your sessions like dungeon maps, tokens, and official content. And ever since Roll20 became mainstream, there have been a couple of other VTTs that have been developed and released that have tried to level up a particular part of the TTRPG experience, like Foundry did by allowing mods which allows for endless customization possibilities, or what Tailspire is trying to do by creating the ultimate 3D VTT, or what Alchemy RPG is trying to do by making a VTT that is as cinematic, immersive, and streamer-friendly as possible. Plus, if Baldur's Gate 3 showed us anything, it's that people love to play TTRPGs in the video game sense, especially with their friends. And if the system is tweaked a little bit to allow for it to play better as a video game, it can become a best-selling game of the year. And I think a couple of other people have already noticed this because there have already been some game systems that have been announced that are going to be strictly online and made specifically for a VTT, which may mean that there will never be a physical copy of the game system rules ever made or released, because why need a physical copy if you're just going to be playing online anyways? And a couple of game systems like the ones I was just talking about are Foundry VTT's Crucible and Fablecraft, which both aim to be game systems that are played virtually on a computer rather than physically at a table. And by this point, you may be saying, oh well, that will never happen because there are too many people who much prefer to play in person with their friends and use real dice and real minis than play on a stupid computer. That's just taking away from the experience. And that may be true, but look at what a lot of new and upcoming and even the most popular TTRPG streamers are doing right now. Most of these streamers are using a TV that's showing a virtual tabletop as their battle map. And sometimes they aren't even using physical miniatures to represent characters or monsters because it's just plainly a lot simpler to use the virtual ones, and not to mention it's cheaper. Or look at most TTRPG Kickstarters nowadays. Most of them have an option for virtual content only in the form of PDFs, a Foundry module, or something of the sort. And speaking of physical minis, I have a confession to make. I have been a player and a game master for 10 years at this point, and I have only ever bought one physical mini. And it's not even here, it's at my parents' house, and it's unpainted, and I haven't even used it in a game yet. And while in many of your eyes I may have just lost my GM card or a lot of my Game Master street cred, this is the case for a lot of Game Masters and new players who are my age and younger, because physical minis and maps are time-consuming and expensive. And if you stack the prices for the rulebooks on top of those minis and things like that, it gets very expensive very quickly, and a lot of people nowadays don't have that kind of money. Plus, if you consider making or purchasing physical maps like Dwarven Forge Tiles or some other dungeon tile making company, it just gets exponentially more expensive. Meanwhile, on a VTT, you can easily find map packs online, or even some maps that are entirely pre-made, complete with lighting effects, walls, ambient sounds, and more. And wait, before you get in the comments and begin telling me about how, oh well, I played D&D for 4 years using nothing but salt shakers, napkins, my imagination, and dice, damn it. You don't need any of that expensive stuff. All you need is dice, your friends, and your imagination. And trust me, I know, but for a lot of new age game masters and players alike, playing entirely on a VTT, or at least partially using a VTT, is a lot easier, less time consuming, and cheaper than playing using only physical minis and maps. And through me hosting professional online games, I've met a lot of people who have never even played physically before because it's a lot easier for them to hop on an online VTT than to drive to a game store or a friend's house where a game is being hosted. And let me tell you, it is 1,000 times easier to get a group of friends together or strangers to play online using a VTT rather than physically, especially for scheduling, let me tell you. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is because I think that in 2024, we will see the beginning of the virtual age of TTRPGs. Because if the trend of moving everything online continues, I don't see why it'd stop. And especially with these new game systems that are set to be released in the coming months or years, I think that they would be ill-prepared if they didn't plan to also launch their game system on a VTT as well. And don't even get me started on VR, because in recent years, especially with all the massive advancements we've made in the VR field, it's only a matter of time before VR D&D becomes mainstream. And if you think that will never happen, well, there are already games out there and games that are being produced right now that are basically D&D in VR. So 2024 may or may not be the beginning of the virtual age for TTRPGs, or the end of physical books as we know them in terms of rule books and things like that, not like a dystopian era like Fahrenheit 451 or whatever. But those were just my thoughts on the future of TTRPGs and the landscape for TTRPGs going into 2024. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments what you guys thought about the video or some of the points that I made in it. Are you guys excited for some of these budding TTRPGs to be released in the coming years or 2024? Or are you worried about rulebooks going out of style and no longer being sold in as large of quantities as they used to be? Let me know what you guys think. But as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be sure to see you in the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye.